Katie, you had a great job as president of Dow Jones, and then you left for a startup called Tortoise. Why?
A great question. I think you have to ask the question, why would anyone who's not a journalist choose to work in journalism? And I started my career in the 90s at the Times. And in my first week, I spent a day in the archives with this wonderful man called Eamon, who showed me all of the amazing things that the Times had done, covering history, its role in history. And he just sort of dropped into conversation at the last minute. But the Times has never been profitable. And as a business person, in my heart, I like to make money. I'm the daughter of a bingo caller. We're sort of the money making sort of gene pool. I thought that was extraordinary that the Times hadn't been profitable. And so I left the Times when it was profitable. So I left in 2014. My co-founder at Tortoise, James, was the editor at the time. I was the chief marketing officer. We did the paywall, the thing that everyone said was going to kill the Times, and turned out to be the commercial success of the Times.
Which is huge now.
Huge now. And so in 2014, when I went to the Wall Street Journal, it was because I felt that my job was done. The Times was on a sustainable path. The Journal, Rupert asked if I would go and join the Journal. The subscription base hadn't grown in a number of years. The professional information business was not growing. Advertising was challenged. And when I left in 2018, we'd hit the 3 million membership target that we'd set. Advertising was flat, which is the new growth in paper terms. And the B2B business was in growth. So again, I felt that the job was done. So the opportunity at Tortoise was more of, I really passionately believe in this industry, but I also believe we need more sustainable models for journalism. And so for me, the opportunity to sort of build something from scratch and get on the ground floor was too good. And with James. Come on with James.
But that's James Harding.
Yes, that's James Harding. Yes.
But is there not another issue as well, which is that you were maybe not able to have an involvement with the kind of journalism that you now like while you were with a big organization like Dow Jones?
A little. But actually, I think that that's more to do with how large news organizations reacted to the opportunity of digital. I think we lost our way a little bit, and we got very excited by the art of the possible, scale, traffic, eyeballs, breaking news. We sort of left our traditional print journalism background and became much more like breaking news 24/7 TV journalism,
And yet that is what everyone is doing, or has been doing for some considerable time. What was it that made you think that Tortoise, with the emphasis on what you call slow news, was actually the answer and could be commercially profitable? Because that's your big thing, isn't it?
That is my big thing. Well, because I'm a marketeer by training, I always think start with the customer. What were customers asking for? What were readers looking for? And you could already tell, I think, about 5 years ago, the sort of FOMO, the fear of missing out, was being replaced by JOMO, the joy of missing out. People were turning off. If you asked people what the problem was for them in their news consumption, they would say, "Oh, there's too much of it. I've just given up." And I don't think that is what everyone has done. But when you hear that, when you hear people talking about how this sort of constant scrolling news feed was causing them anxiety, they could never feel that they were up to date with things, that's not everybody's experience, but that there's something there.
And the negativity as well of the preponderance of news.
A negativity of the preponderance, the fact that actually we were all running so fast that we were missing big stories. I mean, if you think about it, the media that I grew up in, which is predominantly print media from its background, we missed really big stories in the last 10 years. We missed the economic crisis of 2008. We missed the rise of populism. We called Brexit wrong. We called Trump wrong. We called many of the big news stories of our time and of our age wrong because we weren't necessarily asking the questions why, what, when, how, a lot more of the stuff that, we all know is at the basis of great journalism, asking the questions. And I think we were so busy, being hares, that there was obviously a little bit of space for a tortoise.
You've got this lovely phrase that rather than being interested in breaking news, you're concentrating on what is driving it.
Yeah.
Is what is driving it capable of generating headlines that attract loads of readers, viewers, and listeners?
Well, first of all, I don't write our headlines. Well, I don't write them in full stop, but we don't write our headlines for search engine optimization, right? We're not in that game. That's not our business.
But you must write them with a view to them being attractive to make people want to read the story.
Absolutely, but we're not in the game of algorithms reading our headlines to optimize for scale and reach. When you think about the techniques that many newsrooms now use, they use AI to take their headlines to make them go faster. And we really are we only publish one story a week, Martin. We call it a file, right? We take one, take, for example, last week's file. It was called Halloween. It was Matt D'Ancona talking about what happened on October the 31st. Now, we did that the day where obviously Boris had to back down and announce another lockdown. We did that on the 17th of November. Now, for us, that's 2 weeks after the story. That's a fast turnaround for us.
But were you able to add stuff that hadn't come out from those organizations that actually do respond to breaking news?
Yeah, so we do it differently, right? So we will take the story. I think Caitlin Moran said it really nicely when she read it, when she listened to Matt's piece, and she said it's really nice for a news organization to wait until the story's played out so you can go back and really understand what happened, why it happened, and sort of join it up so that in effect, that's us doing breaking news. A 2-week deadline is us moving fast. That's Tortoise being a hare. Our other journalism, the driving forces, to your question, we're looking around things that are happening. We're looking at sort of interesting things that are happening around the outside of the news. So it doesn't mean that we're actually out of step with the news necessarily. It means, for example, when Kamala Harris gets called as vice and as running mate for Biden, we covered her 8-9 months before. And so we were able to up our stories to say, oh, this is who she is, this is what you need to know, this is what you need to understand.
But surely there'd be an awful lot of people, a lot of news organizations that would actually come up with very fast analysis from very clever journalists very quickly after an announcement. So, instead of waiting a week or 2 weeks, and you're up against those. I mean, there are some people who can churn out fantastic arguments and copy it, literally within minutes.
And there are lots of them. So that's obviously the other part of this, which is there isn't just one way of being a journalist. There isn't one way of covering news.
So why wait for Tortoise? Why wait for a week or 2 weeks to get that in-depth piece? Where is your audience coming from? Where's the market coming from for this?
Really interestingly, the journalism, our output, if you like, is actually the end part of a process. So what's different ultimately about Tortoise is that we have our news conferences open and with our members. So actually, as a member of Tortoise, you're participating in the news gathering process. So we'll tell you 2 weeks before we do a story that we're actually looking at a story. You come to our newsroom, to our open news conference, we call it a think-in. And
so anybody could go in there?
Yeah, our members come and they join us. Before they used to join us in person in Fitzrovia in our newsroom, and now they join us on Zoom like everybody else in the world.
And ask questions and make contributions?
They have one rule, no questions.
Ah.
So we're not like a question time. What we do is we sort of say, come. We have an editor hosting it. We invite 2 to 3 experts. So we accept we're not the sort of fonts of all wisdom on every topic, and we'll invite experts into the room. And then our members join. So we would have between 200 and 2,000 members join for a think-in, depending on what the topic is or how we're packaging it. If it's a day-long conversation or if it's a 1-hour conversation. And the idea of a think-in is that it's an organized system of listening. So we're interested in a story. We ask you to participate in it. We hear things that actually we wouldn't hear in a normal newsroom because the members get to share perspectives, points of view, frontline experiences, depending on who they are and what their experiences are. And what's brilliant is that in itself informs our journalism. So when you then get a file, the file is normally a story that we've been working on. A short story is 2 weeks. Most of our files we've been working on for 6 months. So that when you actually get a Tortoise piece of journalism, we've had 1 to 3 think-ins. We've had these open newsroom conversations. People have helped us shape the story. And then, a great example would be Chris Cook's file from earlier this year. He did a file on campus justice, where we told the story of how sexual assaults were going underreported on campuses, partly because universities can be their own judge and jury and have their own rules and systems. And this was a story that walked into our newsroom in June the previous year. So in June of 2019, we had a festival of think-ins at our newsroom in Oxford Street, and a young lady shared a personal story around her experience of the college not supporting her in her experience. And we picked that up. We then found it was a much larger problem and actually quite common across many universities in the country. And Chris Cook then ran an investigation with Ella Hill, one of our young journalists, for 6 months. And it ended up with a piece called Campus Justice, which went in on Trinity Hall. And if you remember back in February, quite a lot of people at Trinity Hall had to step down. And that was as a result of a Tortoise investigation.
So that's the constructive bit of your investigative journalism, that you highlight problems and issues in society, but you then actually, as part of the story, you try to produce potential solutions.
Yes, and we stick with the story. So what we used to do in our old jobs is that, the news cycle would drive much of what we did. And we would, unless there was a campaign that you were running. So the Times has run amazing campaigns, from
Thalidomide and
exactly.
All the way through,
We've got, but they were always seen as campaigns rather than the day-to-day sort of news journalism and coverage. And we have a long history as an industry of doing amazing campaigning journalism. But I think that this is sort of somewhere between campaigning journalism and everyday journalism, in that we'll stick with this story now. We want to sort of look at stories where the power gap is the thing in question, and we're trying to close that power gap. And when you look at something like Campus Justice, when we ran that story, a lot more people came forward. So we're now looking at stories and follow-ups to that. Equally, the government are looking at doing they're looking at having a investigation into how universities run their own systems. It's some universities in Britain, if you don't report a sexual assault within 5 days of it happening, then they won't take it as a report. So you think about sort of the trauma of something happening and then only having 5 days. And so that's not, there's no consistency across the universities of Britain in terms of how they handle something quite serious like this. So the story's not finished. The sort of journalism, the story is still there. There are lots of stories coming out, but the impact of our journalism and the impact of sticking with that story and what's driving those decisions, rather than waiting for the breaking news side of it, is the process that we stick with.
So that gives your readers a deeper understanding than they could get from almost any other outlet. Are readers actually now starting to subscribe to say we actively want this type of journalism, or do you still have a bit of selling to do? Is it £10 a month that you charge?
Oh, you can come and work in marketing, Martin. We have a sort of Netflix model. So it's either £10 a month, or you can join for £80 a year for your first year, or £100 in subsequent years. So that's
and what do you get?
For that, you get 3 things. You get access to our think-ins, which we have every day. sometimes twice a day, in our virtual newsroom. So you can come and participate and join in an open editorial news conference. You get our SenseMaker daily email newsletter, which is our way of doing a readout of the hairs, so you don't have to. And then you have access to our Tortoise file, which is our main journalism output, which is the weekly file, which always starts with an audio essay and then has multiple sort of journalism output, whether it's data visualization, a long read, a picture essay, dependent on what the story is. So those are the things you get. But really, you're joining something that you belong to. So we talk about our audience being members rather than readers, because they could read us, they could listen to us, they could watch us. But ultimately, the thing that they're doing is they're joining something they believe in. And the ultimate difference is that we're very participatory, right? So we are a different type of newsroom. The people that join Tortoise are actually quite a lot younger than most of the people that would have joined my previous newsrooms, be it the Times or the Wall Street Journal. I mean, a third are under 30, over 50% are under 40. And, you know, the way I think about it is it's a bit like if The Economist and the Times are architectural Lego, we might be the Lego, and sort of the week is like Duplo. So you sort of got sort of the Week Junior, which is a brilliant magazine for young kids, being the Duplo.
Absolutely.
Then you've got us being the Lego, and then you can graduate to architectural Lego and creative Lego as you get sort of older.
And how are you funded? Are you profitable yet, or is that still work in progress?
I wish. So we're just over 2 years, really, sort of just over 18 months publicly live, but 2 years really in sort of acquiring our first members. We did a Kickstarter just over 2 years ago. We raised enough money from investors to have a runway of 3 years. So we're coming towards the second year of our runway. So we've got runway through to the end of 2021. Our revenue is, we're building a membership model. So, but it takes a long time to get to the number that you would need to be profitable and sustainable just from membership alone.
And is it tougher to reach that number because of the preponderance of social media, with people almost living their lives with quick sound bites on Instagram and Facebook and so on? That's what you're up against. But do you reckon that there is a core of people who've had enough of that and actually do genuinely want the kind of in-depth news that you're producing?
So yes. I mean, the short answer is yes. The longer answer would be, I think social media works in a number of ways. So I think if you are, using social media for reach, you're sort of probably playing into what I call the rage of social media, the sort of Hyde Park Corner on crack, just people shouting at each other and it just adding to the noise of your life.
Sharp headlines, basically.
Totally. But the other side of social media, and in the DNA of social media, is the fact that actually it's a great platform for sort of engagement and endorsement. And if you go back to a really old-fashioned marketing, word of mouth, social media is a really good platform. If you're worrying about engagement, i.e. retweets with comments, and acting as endorsements, then social media can be a really powerful media and medium for us, as well as it can be for those who want reach and fame. And I think the main thing is that we're seeing is that over 50% of our members come from a personal recommendation. So great membership businesses are membership businesses that are recommended to you by a friend. And so that's what we've built. And we're now just over 60,000 members. And so to your point about, are we profitable? No, we're not from membership alone. But what we've found, and the pandemic's been amazing for us in this, I mean, good things come out of bad things, as it were, is that we found that what we offer to members, our Think-ins, our SenseMaker, and our podcasts, actually are things that partners want to buy as well.
Right. So that's interesting that you have, in a sense, other elements of the media doing normal media stuff who are increasingly being attracted to what you're doing and embracing it. So
yes.
is that and you get money for that?
We do.
Obviously.
Yes.
So it's I mean, you are basically a new kind of news source, which relies on very, very high quality journalism. You take your time, the lovely phrase of, slow news, too many newsrooms are chasing the news but missing the story. So those newsrooms that are busy chasing the news are now coming to you to say, actually, we like what you're doing and can we buy it?
Well, so interestingly, we've just been commissioned by Audible to do an Audible original for their podcast platform. We're finding that businesses and brands are you love the thinking model because it really is a great platform for engagement. And so for us, journalistically, it's a source of our stories. But if you're a business, actually, it's a brilliant way to, engage with key influencers or your own staff, actually. So if you think about what COVID has thrown up, cultures of organizations have been built around water coolers and elevator moments, and with all that taken away, we're finding that people are coming to us to use our journalistic product, so the thinking, to actually host constructive conversations within their organizations, because organizations have the same challenges that we have in the industry. They've got a proper intergenerational gap, the executive versus the workforce. There's a proper, generation gap like that we haven't seen since the war. And so the views and the beliefs and how things work is really different. So it's been great because we've sort of found that actually, we don't have, I grew up in a world where we forgot about reader revenue. We forgot that the readers paid our way and we became obsessed by the advertiser. And it's never healthy when the thing that pays your wages is in a box that's separated from the thing over here, because it creates church and state. And you can't talk and never the twain will meet. And it creates animosity within your own culture. Mm-hmm. And so, and that's sort of not very healthy when you think actually, ultimately, the people that pay the way are the people that read you every day. And so the sort of refocus on reader revenue has been great over the last 10 years. It really has started to be the thing that people talk about a lot. And if you're focusing on your readers and your customers, you naturally focus on constructive journalism, because you have to come back to what people want. What do the readers, the listeners, the viewers want from the media sources that they're tuning into, buying and subscribing? They want to be, yes, informed, but they want to also understand things. And the great thing about Tortoise is that our model enables people to understand together. So when you come to a think-in, I describe them a little bit like they're a cross between a dinner party, a lecture, and a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. Because you have to raise your hand, you participate, you share your experiences, but you learn so much from listening to other people. And so it's constructive in its design as well as its output. So, and it doesn't mean that it's the only form of journalism. There's space for lots of forms of journalism. And I find it really interesting that people ask me the question of sort of, this is, slow journalism. Is there enough space for this in the market? Is it really going to change things? And I'm like, the great thing is, I feel like our industry is innovating again. And when industries don't innovate, they're dying. And so for me, I'm like, it's not the only form of journalism, but for us, it's brilliant, because constructive journalism means you're bringing the reader, the customer, into that journalism as much as you're doing what you want to do.
There are lots of people around the world tuning in to this program. It is, in effect, a global program. Some of them will be new to Tortoise. They won't have heard of Tortoise. So
join us.
So I can't actually let you go without actually asking you to tell us how people join Tortoise.
Oh, thank you. Well, you just type in Tortoise Media and you get
it all comes up.
And it all comes up. You get a 30-day free trial, and then you can decide whether you like us.
Terrific. And where do you see constructive journalism being 5-10 years down the road?
I actually think that it's becoming more mainstream. I think we will do our version of constructive journalism, which is both the process and the output. But I think you already see it in many of the newspapers that I grew up in, there's a lot more campaigning again, and it's front page news. It's not, in sort of the back sections. Last week on the Times, on the front page, when, you know, Boris announced 2030 end of petrol and diesel cars, the Times' front page was based around its clean air for all campaign. And, you know, that's great to see, because that's a real problem of our age.
And
you know?
generally throughout the Times, I mean, I've noticed that in the last year or two, it really has changed, and you get loads of ideas that are coming forward, and you know, quite frankly, it makes reading much more interesting and acceptable.
I totally agree, and I think, and the thing that I think we might see more of if we were looking 5-10 years down the line, is there's always been an arm's length relationship, hasn't there, with the reader to the journalist.
But not with you.
Not with us. You know, one of our best pieces of journalism in the last year, in my opinion, James may disagree, but in my opinion, was our moonshot that we did. And we called out to our membership base and we said, what if we wanted to accelerate net zero to 2030 from the 2050 target? What would we have to do? And we had over 50 of our members, everything from a professor who's running a climate change at one of the universities, Imperial, I think, in London, through to people who are working at the cutting edge of biotechnology, through to students who are studying this at university. We had this great broad church of individuals approach us, farmers. They joined our moonshot, they worked with our editors, they worked on it for 6 months, and they produced a body of work that was actually co-authored.
So it's widening your sources,
yes,
as well, and actually reaching out into the country for those sources, and not going to what you might sometimes regard as the same tired old bunch of people.
Well, partly we're very lucky that we're sort of younger, and we're sort of the new entrant, so we get lots of young people naturally. But I think we also have to be really mindful that we have to be more inclusive in our newsrooms, because, you know, we see this in how diversity is playing out, right? But actually, the thing that I'm most proud of at Tortoise is that, you know, we have, like, do you know Tom's Shoes, where if you buy a pair of their espadrilles, they give another pair of shoes to others. At the heart of Tortoise, we have a 1-for-1 model as well. So when you join as a member, you unlock a membership for someone else. And, you know, therefore, you know, we work really hard with, you know, organisations working at front lines in communities where many of the individuals would never join a paid-for newsroom, to bring those voices into our newsroom so that we actually have a more inclusive and diverse set of voices from the get-go. And it's great. I mean, it is genuinely the thing I miss the most at the moment, is actually physically being with our members in a newsroom, because I've never been with such a broad church of you know, readers, listeners, watchers. You know, when I worked on The Sun, I knew what I got when I went into a room. When I worked on The Times, I knew what I got when I went into the room. When I walk into a Tortoise room, I really don't know what I'm going to get.
Well, hopefully that will come back, the physical presence of so many people.
I hope so.
Once the vaccine works its way through, with any luck. But
April
it is.
April, we're all going to be back together. That would be great.
Katie, thanks very much indeed, and good luck with the building of Tortoise.
Thank you very much.